The boy's laughter didn't sound like laughter anymore. It was thin, short, the kind that breaks halfway through a breath. The nurse standing near the barn door turned away to hide her tears, but the old rancher didn't look up. He just kept brushing the dust from the white horse's neck, slow and steady as if time still mattered. The horse's ribs moved like waves under faded skin, his eyes cloudy but kind. "That one?" the nurse whispered. "He can barely stand." The rancher's hand paused on the brush. "He can still carry a soul," he said. In the small town of Claybrook, people didn't talk much about miracles. They talked about fences, storms, and debt. But on that particular morning, something heavier floated through the cold air, the sound of a mother crying in the house behind the barn. Her son, 11 years old, had been given weeks to live. The doctor said his lungs were tired. The boy said he just wanted to ride a horse, once. The rancher looked at the boy standing at the gate. Small, pale, blanket over his shoulders. He had the kind of eyes that had already learned too much. "Mr. Calhoun," the boy said softly. "Is that the horse you told me about?" Calhoun nodded, resting a hand on the animal's muzzle. "His name's Rusty. He's old like me. But he's got one ride left in him." The nurse frowned. "That horse hasn't been saddled in years." "Then he'll remember how today," Calhoun said, tightening the cinch strap. Rusty snorted softly, ears flicking toward the boy's voice. Something passed between them, not recognition but understanding. The kind you don't explain. When the boy took a shaky step closer, the horse didn't move. He just lowered his head, eyes cloudy but calm, waiting. The nurse whispered, "You really think he can carry him?" Calhoun smiled faintly. "Sometimes the weak ones carry the heaviest things." And as the boy placed his small hand on Rusty's nose, the horse exhaled slow and deep, like an old memory waking up after years of silence. Something unexpected happens on the open field. The wind that morning had a softness to it, the kind that carried both promise and warning. Calhoun lifted the boy gently into the saddle, his rough hands trembling a little. "Don't be scared," he said quietly. "Rusty knows how to walk slow." The boy smiled, the faintest spark of color in his pale face. "I'm not scared. He's beautiful." Rusty shifted his weight, ears turning toward the boy's voice. For a second, it looked like both horse and rider had forgotten they were supposed to be fragile. The nurse stood by the fence, hands tight around her clipboard, whispering prayers under her breath. Calhoun walked beside them, one hand on the reins, his boots dragging a trail through the dust. "We'll go just to the end of the pasture," he said. "Then back. Easy." But when they reached the open field, the boy laughed again, a real laugh this time, and Rusty lifted his head as if he'd been waiting to hear that sound. "He wants to run," the boy said. Calhoun froze. "He can't." "Please?" the boy asked, looking down, eyes wide with hope. The rancher stared at the horse, old and thin but standing tall for the first time in years. "Just a little," Calhoun said finally, stepping back. The nurse gasped as Rusty took off at a slow, uneven trot that somehow found rhythm. His mane caught the sunlight, the boy's blanket fluttering behind him like a small flag. The boy leaned forward, his voice breaking with joy. "He remembers, Mr. Calhoun. He remembers." Calhoun felt a tightness in his chest that wasn't age. It was the kind of ache that comes from seeing something too pure to last. Rusty slowed near the far fence, sides heaving, and turned back on his own, hooves steady despite the weakness in his legs. The boy stroked his neck. "He's not tired," he whispered as if saying it would make it true. But Calhoun saw the tremor in the horse's flank, the way his breath caught between steps. When they reached the barn again, Rusty stopped on his own and lowered his head. The boy slid off, wobbly but grinning. "Can I ride him again tomorrow?" Calhoun forced a smile. "We'll see, kiddo." But as Rusty exhaled a long, uneven breath, Calhoun knew deep down, tomorrow was a promise neither of them could make. Makes a decision that changes everything? That night, the ranch was quiet except for the wind tapping against the tin roof. Calhoun sat at the kitchen table, hat still on, hands clasped around a cold cup of coffee. The nurse had gone home and the boy's mother was asleep in the spare room. From the barn came the slow rhythm of Rusty's breathing, uneven, old, but alive. Calhoun looked through the window, where a faint lantern glow traced the horse's outline. "You did good today, old man," he murmured. "Real good." He rubbed the side of his neck, feeling the weight of years pressing down. He'd owned a dozen horses in his lifetime, strong ones, wild ones, but none like Rusty. That horse had come to him half-starved from an auction pen 15 years ago. No papers, no history, just eyes that still asked for another chance. The sound of small footsteps broke the silence. The boy stood in the doorway, blanket around his shoulders. I couldn't sleep, he said softly. Is Rusty okay? Calhoun smiled a little. He's okay. He's just resting. Can I see him? The old man hesitated, then nodded. They walked to the barn, the lantern light swinging between them. Inside, Rusty lifted his head when he heard the boy's voice. His ears flicked forward and his tail swayed once, weak but content. The boy pressed his cheek against the horse's neck. I think he knows, he whispered. Calhoun frowned. Knows what? That I don't have much time, the boy said matter-of-factly. Mom doesn't like when I say that. But animals always know, don't they? Calhoun's throat tightened. Maybe they just listen better than people. The boy smiled. Then I want to talk to him tomorrow. Just me and him. No one else. Calhoun nodded, though the thought scared him. All right, son. Tomorrow. When the boy finally went back inside, Calhoun stayed, leaning on the stall gate. Rusty stood quiet, eyes half closed. You still got strength for one more day? Calhoun asked softly. The horse blinked slow as if answering. Outside, the stars hung low over the fields. Somewhere deep inside, Calhoun already knew what the horse was preparing for, and he prayed the morning would come gently. The dawn came pale and thin, barely strong enough to color the hills. Calhoun woke before the rooster, boots already on before the coffee had finished dripping. The boy was awake too, waiting by the back door with the same blanket over his shoulders and a spark in his tired eyes. You sure you're up for this? Calhoun asked. The boy nodded. Rusty's waiting. The rancher sighed, more to himself than to anyone. All right then. Let's not keep him waiting. When they entered the barn, Rusty was already standing, his head lifted, ears turning toward the sound of the boy's steps. He looked old, yes, but there was a steadiness in him that morning, a calm like he understood what was coming. Calhoun ran his hand along the horse's neck. You feel that? He whispered. He came for you, old boy. The saddle creaked softly as he lifted the boy up. Just a short one, Calhoun said. Just to the creek, the boy replied. He'll like the sound of water. Calhoun didn't argue. He took the lead rope and started toward the open pasture. The air smelled of dew and cedar, and somewhere in the distance a hawk called over the valley. Each hoofstep landed gentle but certain. The boy leaned forward, whispering things only the horse could hear. Halfway down the hill, Rusty slowed. Calhoun turned, concern flashing across his face. You all right, buddy? The boy's voice came soft. He's listening. To what? Calhoun asked. To the creek. And maybe, to me. Rusty took another step, then another, finding rhythm again. When they reached the water's edge, the boy laughed weakly. I told you he'd like it. Calhoun smiled, eyes stinging. Yeah, you were right. The horse dipped his muzzle toward the water but didn't drink. Instead, he stood still, his sides rising and falling with deep, careful breaths. The boy rested his hand on Rusty's neck and closed his eyes. He's warm, he said. Feels like the sun. For a while no one spoke. The wind moved through the grass like a quiet hymn. Then Calhoun noticed the boy's head had dropped forward, chin against his chest, a small smile still on his lips. Rusty stood perfectly still, not moving, not flinching, as if he already knew what had happened. Calhoun's hat fell from his hand. The sound of the creek carried the rest. Silent journey back, and the meaning of that ride begins to unfold? Calhoun stood frozen for a long time, his breath shallow, the weight of silence pressing on him harder than any storm. The morning light touched the boy's face, peaceful and still, and for a moment Calhoun wished time would stop right there. Just quiet air, soft water, and the two souls who'd finally found rest in each other. He laid a trembling hand on Rusty's shoulder. Easy boy, he whispered. We'll go home now. Rusty didn't move at first. He just stood there, head low, as if waiting for permission. Calhoun loosened the reins gently and began to walk. The horse followed without a sound, his steps slow, steady, careful, carrying more than just weight. The walk back felt longer than it should have. The wind had gone still, and every sound, the creak of leather, the faint splash of hooves leaving the creek, felt like a farewell. Calhoun glanced up once at the sky. If you're watching, he murmured, you picked the right horse. When they reached the pasture gate, Rusty stopped. He turned his head toward the sun, eyes milky but aware, nostrils flaring softly. Then, with a small, shaking breath, he knelt, just like that day years ago when Calhoun first found him half-starved and frightened in the auction pen. Back then it had been fear. Today it was something else, reverence. Calhoun lowered the boy carefully, wrapping him in the blanket. The nurse and the mother ran from the house when they saw him, their cries breaking the stillness. Calhoun couldn't speak. He just stood beside the horse, hat pressed to his chest, tears falling onto the dry earth. Rusty didn't look away. His ears flicked once toward the mother's sobs, then back toward Calhoun. The rancher touched his muzzle. "You did it, old friend. You carried him home." Later, after everyone had gone inside, Calhoun stayed with Rusty by the fence. The horse stood still, breathing hard, every rise of his ribs slower than the last. Calhoun whispered, "You can rest now, you hear?" Rusty blinked once as if to say he already had. Then he lowered his head to the ground and closed his eyes. Calhoun sank to his knees beside him, his voice breaking in the quiet. "You carried a boy to heaven today, Rusty. Ain't many men ever do a finer thing than that." By the next morning, word had spread across Claybrook like wind through wheat. Nobody really knew how they heard, maybe from the nurse, maybe from the undertaker's helper, but every porch light in town burned late that night. The boy's mother hadn't left her room, her grief wrapped around her like a second skin. But outside, people whispered one name again and again. Rusty. Calhoun sat on the porch, hat in his lap, eyes fixed on the field where the old horse lay beneath a tarp. He hadn't moved him yet. He couldn't. The sky was wide and pale, and somewhere in it he imagined the sound of hooves, steady and strong like they used to be. Dean, the feed store owner, rode up slow. "Heard what happened," he said, voice soft. "Folks are saying that horse just waited till the boy was safe." Calhoun didn't look up. "He didn't wait," he said. "He knew." Dean nodded, eyes glassy. "Town's holdin' a service for the boy tomorrow. You should bring Rusty's saddle. Let folks see." Calhoun traced his thumb along the brim of his hat. "They all thought he was just another broken horse," he murmured. "Maybe he was," Dean said. "But even broken things shine when the light hits them right." When Dean left, Calhoun finally stood. He walked down to the pasture, boots sinking in the damp earth. The tarp fluttered once in the wind and he lifted it gently. Rusty looked peaceful, still dusty from the trail, still wearing the faint mark of the boy's small hand on his neck. Calhoun knelt beside him. "You carried him where no road could," he whispered. "And you didn't stop till you reached the gate." He brushed the horse's mane once more, then folded the tarp back. That night, under a sky full of stars, he buried Rusty near the fence line facing east, where the sunrise always touched first. The next day, when the town gathered for the boy's service, someone noticed a second wreath of wildflowers lying quietly at the edge of the field. Nobody had placed it there, but everyone knew who it was for. Calhoun stood at the back, hat over his heart. When the preacher said, "The Lord lent us gentle creatures to teach us grace," Calhoun felt his throat tighten. Rusty had taught them all. 3 days after the funeral, the ranch was still quiet. The house smelled of flowers that wouldn't die and coffee that never stayed warm. Calhoun moved slow, not because of age this time, but because there was nowhere to hurry to. The barn sat open, empty, the air thick with memories that refused to leave. Every morning he still walked there out of habit, half expecting to hear the soft snort that used to greet him. That's where he found it, a letter folded neatly and tucked under the saddle Rusty used on his last ride. His name was written in a shaky hand. He sat on a hay bale and opened it carefully. "Dear Mr. Calhoun," it began, the handwriting uneven but brave. "If you're reading this, it means I got to ride Rusty and maybe I'm not here anymore. Please don't be sad. I think God lets horses run forever, and I told him Rusty should be in charge. You said once that some animals carry souls. I think you were right. He carried mine, but I think he carried yours too. When you miss him, just go outside in the morning, he'll be the wind that moves the grass." Calhoun's vision blurred. The paper shook in his hands. At the bottom, a small drawing, a crooked heart, a stick horse, and 3 words, "Thank you both." He sat there for a long time before folding the letter and pressing it against his chest. The barn felt less empty now. Later that afternoon, the boy's mother came by, her eyes red but calm. "He wrote one for you too?" she asked softly. Calhoun nodded, unable to speak. She smiled faintly. "He said you and that horse made him feel alive again. That's more than the doctors ever could have done." Calhoun swallowed hard. "He made Rusty alive again too." They stood together in silence until the shadows stretched long across the field. The wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass, and for the first time since that morning at the creek, Calhoun thought he heard hooves. Not heavy, not loud, just the quiet rhythm of a horse moving somewhere unseen. He looked toward the pasture, and the grass bent in perfect lines as if something was running free through it. He didn't say a word. He just smiled through the tears and whispered, "You keep running, old boy. I'll catch up later." A week passed, then another. The world outside the ranch went on as it always did. Trains still whistled at dusk, church bells still rang on Sunday mornings. But something about Claybrook had changed. People began leaving notes by Calhoun's fence, short ones folded or scrawled on scraps of paper. One said, "For the boy." Another, "For Rusty who carried what we couldn't." Someone even left a small horseshoe polished bright. Calhoun didn't know who started it, but every morning there were more. Some came from strangers driving through town. Others from old ranchers who hadn't spoken in years. Nobody wanted to talk about miracles, but everyone seemed to believe in one now. He built a small wooden marker by Rusty's grave, carved with the words, "He carried a soul." He didn't need more than that. Every sunrise hit the marker first, lighting the letters in gold. That's when the idea came to him. The next Sunday after church, Calhoun stood up in front of the townsfolk gathered in the dusty square. He wasn't much for speeches and his voice cracked at first. "We've all owned good horses," he began. "Some strong, some wild. But that old white one of mine, he did something I'll never forget. He taught me that love don't measure by years or strength. It measures by what you carry and how gentle you carry it." The crowd went silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. "So here's what I think we'll do," he continued. "Out by the east pasture, I'm buildin' a small shelter. We'll call it Rusty's Rest. A place for old, unwanted horses. The ones folks say are too tired or too broken. They'll live out their days free with grass under their feet and sky over their backs. Because maybe the ones we call weak are the only ones strong enough to carry our hearts." Someone started clapping, slow at first, then others joined. By the end, the whole square was filled with applause and tears. When it quieted again, Calhoun said softly, "If that old horse could see us now, I reckon he'd just nod and go back to grazing." That night, when he stood by the fence watching the stars rise, he swore he heard a soft whinny on the wind. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. Spring arrived soft that year with rain that smelled like new life. The pasture grass came back green and thick, and Calhoun spent his days hammering, sawing, and mending boards until his hands blistered. He didn't mind. The sound of nails hitting wood felt like prayer to him now, steady, patient, and full of purpose. By the time the sign went up, Rusty's Rest burned carefully into the grain. People from all over Claybrook had started helping. Dean hauled lumber in his pickup. The nurse donated feed. Even the school kids painted small wooden hearts to hang along the fence. The boy's mother came by every few days with sandwiches and quiet smiles. "He'd be proud of this," she said once. Calhoun tipped his hat. "It's his and Rusty's place," he said. "I'm just keeping it ready." The first rescue came one dusty afternoon in late March. A chestnut mare with ribs showing, eyes wary, and a limp that made every step look painful. Her owner, a thin man with guilt written all over his face, wouldn't meet Calhoun's eyes. "She's too old to ride," he said. Calhoun stroked the mare's neck gently. "So was Rusty," he murmured. Then louder, "We'll take her." When the man left, the mare stood still, nostrils flaring at the smell of fresh hay. Calhoun opened the gate and let her wander in. "You're home now, girl," he said. "Ain't nobody gonna ask nothin' of you here." That night, as he leaned on the fence watching her graze, he thought about how quiet the place used to be. Now it was alive again, the sound of hooves, the rustle of grass, the heartbeat of something bigger than grief. A few days later, the town paper printed a small story. Rancher opens sanctuary in memory of boy and horse. Calhoun didn't care about the attention. He just cared that the empty stalls were filling again. He started talking to the horses the way he once talked to Rusty, soft, patient, full of stories. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, the chestnut mare would lift her head suddenly, ears twitching at something only she could hear. Calhoun always smiled when she did. "That's him, ain't it?" he'd whisper. "Old Rusty's keepin' watch." By summer, Rusty's Rest had become more than a pasture. It was a kind of quiet church without walls. The horses came from everywhere. Tired carriage maras from the county fair, a retired police gelding, even a miniature pony someone found wandering near the highway. Calhoun took them all. He said the same thing every time, "If they're still breathin', they ain't done yet." One afternoon, a pickup truck rolled up the long dirt road, radio playing low. A social worker stepped out with a boy in the passenger seat, maybe 16, thin as a fence post, eyes that looked older than his years. She said, "This is Luke. Community service. He'll help with feed and cleaning stalls." Calhoun nodded. "You know which end of a shovel's which?" Luke shrugged. "Guess I'll learn." At first, the boy didn't say much. He worked hard, though, quiet, focused like he had something heavy sitting inside him. Calhoun didn't press. He just gave him chores and space. But one evening while repairing a fence, Calhoun caught Luke staring at the chestnut mare. "She's limpin' less these days," Calhoun said. Luke nodded. "She trusts you." "Nah," Calhoun replied. "She just knows I ain't gonna hurt her." For the first time Luke smiled, small but real. The next day he showed up early, feeding the horses before Calhoun even came out. He started talking to them, not loud, just a few words here and there. Calhoun listened from the barn doorway, hiding his smile. One evening Luke asked, "Who was Rusty?" Calhoun looked out over the field, where the sunset turned everything the color of old copper. "An old horse that carried more than he should have," he said. "And a friend who taught me what strength really means." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "You think horses forgive people?" Calhoun's gaze softened. "I think they don't have to. They just love us anyway." That night, Calhoun watched Luke brush the chestnut mare with gentle strokes, careful not to rush her. The mare leaned her head close, eyes half closed, calm. For a moment, in the fading light, Calhoun swore he saw a faint white blur at the edge of the field, a shape moving slow and steady, the way Rusty used to walk when the world was quiet. He tipped his hat and whispered, "Keep watchin', old boy. You're doing fine." A few weeks later, Calhoun noticed something different in the boy. Luke still worked hard, still came before dawn, but there were nights he didn't go home. Calhoun would find him sleeping in the loft, arms crossed behind his head, eyes open to the rafters. One evening as they sat by the fence eating supper from tin plates, Calhoun asked, "Your folks know you're out here this late?" Luke gave a half smile. "Ain't much to go home to." Calhoun waited, letting silence do the asking. "My mom's gone," Luke said finally. "My dad, he drinks. Says I remind him of her. So I stay away when I can." The old rancher nodded slowly. "Ain't easy growing up in a house that's loud for all the wrong reasons." Luke looked down, pushing a bit of gravel with his boot. "You ever lose someone?" Calhoun stared out at the pasture, where the wind bent the grass in smooth waves. "I did," he said. "A boy who reminded me a lot of you. And a horse who reminded me what love looks like when it doesn't quit." Luke was quiet for a long time, eyes fixed on the fading light. "You think I could ride one of them?" he asked softly. Calhoun smiled. "You can when you're ready. But you don't ride to run away here. You ride to remember you can still move forward." They started training the next morning. Luke was clumsy at first, reins too tight, heels too sharp, but patient. The chestnut mare trusted him. Every day she walked a little steadier, and so did Luke. One afternoon, as Calhoun watched from the fence, the mare stopped at the far end of the field and lifted her head. Luke followed her gaze, but there was nothing there, just sunlight flashing against the dust. Still, both of them seemed to listen to something far away, something only they could hear. When Luke returned, sweat on his brow and a smile that looked new, Calhoun said, "How'd it feel?" Luke grinned. "Like she carried me further than I went." Calhoun chuckled softly. "Then she learned from the best." That night, the sky stretched wide and orange. Calhoun sat on the porch, watching Luke laugh with the other horses, and for the first time since that day by the creek, he didn't feel the weight of loss, only the quiet joy of something beautiful continuing through another heart. By autumn, Rusty's Rest looked nothing like the lonely field it once was. Fences gleamed with new paint, wind chimes hung from the barn eaves, and the air carried the steady music of hoofbeats. What started as a grave had grown into a refuge, not just for horses, but for hearts that needed mending. The townsfolk decided to hold a small gathering on the anniversary of the boys' last ride. They called it the Day of Gentle Strength. Calhoun didn't want a crowd, but the people came anyway. Families, children, ranch hands, even the preacher who had spoken at the funeral. They stood by the east pasture, where the morning light touched first. Luke stood beside Calhoun, taller now, his face stronger, the weight in his eyes replaced by calm. He wore a clean shirt, boots polished, and in his hands he held Rusty's old bridle, oiled and shining. "You sure he'd want all this?" Luke asked quietly. Calhoun smiled. "He'd probably just shake his mane and go back to grazing. But it ain't for him anymore. It's for everyone he carried, in one way or another." The preacher spoke for a few minutes, simple words about grace, second chances, and the strange ways love keeps showing up when we think it's gone. Then Calhoun stepped forward. His voice was rough but steady. "This place ain't built on miracles," he said. "It's built on moments, small ones, quiet ones. Like an old horse talking, one more step when nobody thinks he can. Like a boy's hand on his neck, saying, thank you without words. And maybe that's what real strength is, not how long you live but how gentle you walk through the world while you're here." No one spoke for a moment. The wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass, bending it in waves, the same way it had the day Rusty took his last breath. Somewhere in that whispering wind, Calhoun thought he heard hooves again, soft, steady, familiar. He smiled, touching the brim of his hat. "You can rest now, old friend," he murmured. "We'll carry it from here." Luke placed the bridle over the fence post, and the preacher bowed his head. The sun broke through the clouds then, warm and golden, stretching across the field where every horse stood still, as if even they understood. And that morning, every person there carried home the same truth. That real redemption isn't about starting over. It's about finishing with love even when the road's almost done.